There is a form of power that requires no words, no gesture, no visible display. It exists in the space between people, in the silence where most are afraid to stand. The samurai understood this power. They called it harage, the art of the belly, the invisible communication that moves through presence alone. In a world that screams for attention, demands constant expression, and rewards those who speak the loudest, this ancient discipline has become almost extinct. But for those who understand it, harage is the most formidable weapon ever created. Chapter 1: The Man Who Could Not Speak. Takeshi was a project manager in Tokyo. He had risen through the ranks not because he was the most vocal in meetings, not because he networked relentlessly, and not because he sought recognition. His colleagues noticed something about him that they could not quite name. When Takeshi entered a conference room, the energy would shift. People would settle. Conversations that had been chaotic would find order, not because he demanded it, not because he raised his voice or asserted authority. Something invisible happened. His presence alone commanded a kind of respect that no title could grant him. But Takeshi did not feel powerful. He felt isolated. He watched his peers climb faster, speak louder, make themselves known. He had been raised by his grandfather, a man of few words who had studied martial arts in his youth. The old man never explained what he was teaching. He simply modeled it. Takeshi had absorbed a discipline that he did not yet understand, a way of being that kept him perpetually misunderstood by the modern world. He wondered if his quietness was a strength or a failure. Chapter 2: The Principle of Harage. Harage is not silence for silence's sake. It is not shyness or withdrawal. It is the deliberate cultivation of such profound internal alignment that your presence becomes a form of communication more powerful than any words could be. The term literally translates to the art of the belly, hara meaning belly, center, or core, and gi meaning art or technique. In samurai tradition, the hara was understood as the seat of the soul, the center of gravity, the place where true power originates. The samurai did not develop harage as a form of mysticism. It was a practical discipline. A warrior in battle cannot afford to waste energy on unnecessary words. A general commanding troops in chaos cannot rely on eloquence. They must communicate through absolute certainty, through a presence so aligned with purpose that those around them feel it and respond. This was harage, the invisible transmission of intent through the integrity of one's being. It was mastered not through speaking, but through the elimination of all that was false. Miyamoto Musashi, perhaps the most celebrated swordsman in Japanese history, understood this principle intimately. Musashi was not known for eloquent speeches or clever rhetoric, yet men feared him and followed him. His presence alone suggested a kind of completeness, a man so aligned with his purpose that he needed no explanation, no justification, no performance. This was harage in its highest form, a warrior whose very existence communicated everything that needed to be known. Chapter 3: The Erosion of Presence. Modern life has destroyed harage without most people even noticing. We are taught from childhood to perform, to articulate, to make ourselves visible. The louder you are, the more successful you appear. The more you explain yourself, the more legitimate you seem. Social media has weaponized this principle. We broadcast our thoughts, our achievements, our outrage, our curated versions of ourselves into the void, desperate for the validation of strangers' approval. In this environment, silence feels like death. Presence feels like absence. The invisible has become worthless. But something has broken in this process. The more we speak, the less we are heard. The more we perform, the less authentic we become. We have created a world of tremendous noise and tremendous emptiness. Millions of people screaming into the darkness, none of them truly connected to anything real. The samurai knew something about this danger. They understood that the person who speaks least often carries the most weight when they do speak. They understood that presence is built through consistency, through alignment between internal truth and external action, and through the elimination of unnecessary noise. Takeshi began to understand this only when his company brought in a consultant, a Western executive coach who taught communication skills, networking strategies, personal branding. The consultant told Takeshi that his greatest weakness was his invisibility. He should speak up more in meetings. He should self-promote. He should build his personal brand. For a moment, Takeshi doubted everything his grandfather had taught him. He tried to change. He forced himself to speak more. He manufactured enthusiasm he did not feel. For 3 weeks, he performed the role of an ambitious, visible professional. His colleagues seemed to respect him more on the surface. But something crucial had broken. His presence had fractured. He was no longer aligned, and he felt it immediately. Chapter 4. The Discipline of Alignment. Harage is built on a single foundation, absolute alignment between who you are and what you present to the world. This alignment cannot be faked. The samurai understood that any gap between internal truth and external presentation would communicate itself. A warrior who was afraid but pretended to be confident would be seen as afraid. A general who did not believe in his own strategy would transmit that doubt to his troops. This is why the samurai spent their lives in the discipline of shugyo, austere training that aligned body, mind, and spirit into a single instrument. This alignment is not achieved through positive thinking or affirmations. It is achieved through elimination. The samurai eliminated unnecessary words because words that were not essential diluted presence. They eliminated unnecessary gestures because false movements communicated inauthenticity. They eliminated the false self, the ego's desire to be seen, to be validated, to be important. And what remained was a human being in complete alignment with reality. From this alignment, true power emerged. This was Harage. Takeshi's grandfather had been teaching him this all along, though he had never named it. The old man would sit in silence for hours. He would perform small tasks with complete attention. He would speak only when speech was necessary, and when he did speak, every word carried weight because it had been earned through consideration. He was not performing restraint. Restraint was simply who he was, because he had eliminated everything that was not essential. His presence communicated this alignment to everyone around him. Chapter 5. The Return. When Takeshi finally abandoned the consultant's advice and returned to his natural way of being, something shifted in his career. He stopped trying to be seen. He stopped self-promoting. He stopped explaining himself or justifying his decisions. Instead, he became more intentional about every action, every meeting, every interaction. He listened more deeply. He spoke only when he had something true to contribute. He became present in the way his grandfather had modeled, not as an absence, but as a complete presence, undiluted by ego or performance. Within 6 months, Takeshi was promoted to a senior leadership position. His colleagues told him later that they had come to trust him in a way they could not quite explain. He did not inspire through charisma or eloquence. He inspired through a kind of integrity that was communicated not through words, but through absolute consistency between what he said and what he did, between who he claimed to be and who he actually was. This was harage operating in the modern world, ancient samurai wisdom, applied to the mundane reality of corporate life. Chapter 6. The Practice. Harage cannot be learned from a book or a video alone. It must be practiced, embodied, made into a way of life. The practice begins with simple awareness. Notice where you speak unnecessarily. Notice where you perform rather than simply exist. Notice the gap between who you truly are and who you are pretending to be. Most of us live in this gap constantly, and it communicates itself to everyone around us, no matter how well we think we are hiding it. The second practice is alignment. Begin to eliminate the false. In your next meeting, speak only when you have something true to say. In your next conversation, listen completely rather than planning your response. In your next day, perform only the actions that align with your actual values and beliefs, not the values you think you should have. This is uncomfortable. The ego will resist. But this discomfort is the beginning of real presence. The third practice is constancy. Harage is not a technique you deploy in moments of importance. It is a way of being that becomes your baseline. The samurai did not turn presence on and off. They lived it. They understood that presence is built through 10,000 small choices, each one an opportunity to either align with truth or hide from it. This is why Musashi's life reads not as a series of dramatic moments, but as the consistent application of a single principle across decades.
Chapter 7. The Power of Silence. In the end, harage is simply this: the recognition that you do not need to prove anything to anyone, and that the attempt to do so is what creates the very weakness you are trying to overcome. The samurai were feared not because they shouted about their skill or boasted about their victories. They were feared because everyone could sense that they had moved beyond the need for validation. They had nothing to prove and everything to offer. This combination is terrifying to those still trapped in the game of self-promotion and approval seeking. When you no longer need others to recognize your worth, when you have aligned yourself completely with what is true and real, your presence becomes a form of power that most people cannot understand. It is not aggressive. It does not demand. It simply exists, and its existence commands respect. This is what the samurai called harage. This is what Musashi embodied. This is what Takeshi's grandfather had been teaching him all along. The modern world will tell you that this approach is career suicide, that you will be overlooked, that visibility is everything. But the modern world is drowning in visibility. It is suffocating under the weight of endless noise and empty performance. In this environment, the person who has cultivated true presence, real alignment, and the discipline to speak only what is true, that person becomes invisible only until they matter. And when they matter completely. The power of harage is that it requires nothing but yourself. Not your words, not your credentials, not your network. Just the discipline to become completely, authentically, unavoidably yourself. In a world of performers, the person who simply is will always command attention. Not through noise, but through silence. Not through visibility, but through presence. Not through words, but through the invisible art that the samurai perfected centuries ago.